In the final years of World War II, as Europe burned and millions fought for survival, a strange group of men stepped onto the battlefield. They carried no rifles. They fired no bullets. Yet they waged one of the most effective campaigns of deception in military history. They were artists, designers, sound engineers, and actors. And their mission was to trick the German army into fighting shadows. This is the story of the Ghost Army, the secret U.S. unit that used inflatable tanks, fake radio messages, and stagecraft to save thousands of lives. The year was 1944. The Allies had landed in Normandy. Hitler's army was retreating, but not defeated. The Western Front was unpredictable, filled with ambushes, counterattacks, and sudden movements. To win, the Allies needed not just strength, but deception. They had to make the Germans think their forces were somewhere they weren't. And to do that, they needed artists who could paint illusions across the battlefields of Europe. The Ghost Army was officially known as the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. Its creation was approved by the highest levels of the U.S. Army. Its purpose? To deceive, distract, and confuse the enemy using art, sound, and imagination. It was a unit unlike any other. Among its 1,100 men were art students from schools like Yale and Cooper Union. There were painters, sculptors, fashion designers, sound engineers, and even Broadway set designers. Some would later become famous, including future artists like Bill Blass and Ellsworth Kelly. They were young, creative, and untrained for war. But they were about to create a new kind of weapon, one built not of steel and gunpowder, but of illusion. Their training began in complete secrecy. Even other American soldiers had no idea what they were doing. The Ghost Army learned to build fake tanks from rubber, complete with realistic paint and shadows. They practiced assembling fake artillery positions and entire motor pools. But their most powerful tools were sound and radio. Sound engineers from Hollywood recorded tanks, trucks, and artillery fire on giant wire recorders. Using powerful loudspeakers, they could project the sound of a full armored division up to 15 miles away. To the Germans, it would sound like an entire army on the move. The men learned how to impersonate real units. They studied the badges and insignia of famous divisions, replicated their vehicles, and even mimicked their radio traffic. If the 6th Armored Division was supposed to be in Belgium, the Ghost Army could make it seem like it was in France. They created confusion at every level of the German intelligence network. Their deception operations were known by code names, and each one was more daring than the last. Their first major test came shortly after D-Day, Operation Brest, August 1944. The Allies were pushing through France, and the German defenders in Brest were stubbornly holding the line. The Ghost Army was ordered to create a fake concentration of forces, to make the Germans think the attack would come from a different direction. They inflated rubber tanks overnight. They staged fake artillery batteries and used sound trucks to simulate armored columns moving through the countryside. When German scouts flew overhead, they saw what appeared to be a powerful armored division preparing to strike. The ruse worked. The Germans shifted their defenses right into Allied traps. The Ghost Army's first mission was a success, but it was only the beginning. As the Allies advanced across Europe, the Ghost Army followed close behind, setting up operation after operation. Their most famous missions were yet to come: Operation Bettembourg, Operation Viersen, and the legendary deception near the Rhine River. In September 1944, the Ghost Army set up one of its most complex performances near the town of Metz. Here they created the illusion of an entire corps, complete with fake command posts, vehicle convoys, and dummy artillery. The men worked in shifts, inflating tanks, painting vehicles, and wiring sound equipment through the night. From the air, it looked like thousands of troops had arrived. In reality, there were barely 1,000 men. The deception delayed German reinforcements and allowed real divisions to maneuver unopposed. Their trickery saved countless lives. But this was not without danger. The Ghost Army often operated close to the front lines, sometimes within artillery range of German guns. They carried no real weapons. If discovered, they would have been massacred. Many of the men recalled the fear of being shelled while standing beside rubber tanks. Some laughed about it years later, but at the time they were living on pure nerve and luck. One of their most dramatic missions took place in early 1945, Operation Viersen. The Allies were preparing to cross the Rhine River, one of the last natural barriers before Germany itself. The plan was to fool the Germans into believing the main crossing would happen miles north of the real site. The Ghost Army moved into position under cover of darkness. They inflated over 100 fake tanks and artillery guns. They blasted recordings of tank engines and bridge building through loudspeakers. Fake radio chatter filled the airwaves. Even reconnaissance planes were tricked. The reflections of the rubber tanks were enhanced with metallic paint to fool aerial cameras. When the real crossing began elsewhere, the Germans were caught off guard. Entire divisions had been diverted to defend against the Ghost Army's illusion. The deception worked so perfectly that senior German officers later admitted they had no idea the unit even existed. Behind every operation was creativity, but also exhaustion. The men of the Ghost Army worked long nights under constant threat. They had to improvise on the move, using paint, fabric, and whatever materials they could find. They lived like stagehands in a theater of war. One soldier later said, "We were putting on a show for an audience that wanted to kill us." The Ghost Army carried out more than 20 deception operations between 1944 and 1945. They imitated infantry, armored, and airborne units. Their performances could move entire divisions away from the front lines. Historians estimate that their efforts saved between 15,000 and 30,000 Allied lives. But at the time, almost no one knew they existed. Their work was classified for decades. Even their families had no idea what they had done during the war. It wasn't until 1996 that the Ghost Army story began to surface publicly. The secrecy had finally been lifted. When their operations ended, many of these men went back to their artistic careers. Some became world-renowned. Fashion designer Bill Blass went on to become one of the most successful in America. Ellsworth Kelly became a celebrated painter and sculptor. Others returned to quiet lives, carrying memories they could never speak of. For them, the war was not about killing, but about creativity. A battle fought with imagination instead of bullets. The Ghost Army's legacy lives on in modern warfare. Their methods of camouflage, decoy, and psychological deception became the foundation for future operations during the Cold War and beyond. Today, military strategists still study their tactics to understand the power of misdirection in battle. It wasn't brute strength that made the Ghost Army so effective. It was their ability to make the enemy see what wasn't there. In 2022, the U.S. Congress finally recognized the Ghost Army with the Congressional Gold Medal, one of the nation's highest honors. It was a long overdue tribute to men who fought a different kind of war. Their courage didn't come from pulling a trigger. It came from standing in the dark with a rubber tank and a reel of recorded gunfire, while real shells fell nearby. They were soldiers of illusion, artists of war, and they proved that creativity could be just as powerful as courage. When the war finally ended, the Ghost Army vanished quietly. Their tents were folded, their rubber tanks deflated, their sound trucks silenced. They left behind no monuments, no graves, no headlines. Only stories whispered between veterans who once made the impossible seem real. Their mission had always been to disappear, and in that they succeeded. Even today, many people have never heard of them, but their invisible footprints stretch across the battlefields of Europe. Every life saved by their deception is a reminder of what they accomplished. The Ghost Army didn't just fool the enemy, they changed the way wars are fought, forever. In the quiet aftermath of the war, one veteran of the Ghost Army said, "We weren't heroes in the usual sense. We didn't take a hill or capture a city, but we made others believe we could. And that was enough. And that was their victory." This is the forgotten war room, where history speaks again.